Bonjour à tous. Merci d'être là à Nantes pour cette première édition de Digital Intelligence. Avant de commencer cette première keynote session, je vais donner la parole aux personnes qui ont contribué fortement et qui ont rendu possible cet événement à Nantes. Donc, je vais commencer par Paul Billaudot, qui est directeur de la Cité des Congrès, qui nous accueille aujourd'hui.
Bien, bonjour à tous. Très heureux de vous accueillir pour cette première édition de DI, Intelligence numérique, ici à la Cité des Congrès de Nantes. La Cité des Congrès de Nantes est un outil de Nantes Métropole dont les missions qui nous ont été confiées sont d'appuyer et de soutenir les politiques publiques pour notamment faire rayonner notre territoire à l'international et surtout en s'associant avec les forces d'excellence et les acteurs institutionnels de notre métropole. Dans ce cadre, depuis 2009, la Cité des Congrès a tissé un réseau de partenariats avec le Québec et la ville de Québec, conduisant à un rapprochement entre les territoires sur un mode projet, et notamment un rapprochement entre nos deux universités, les deux chambres de commerce et les deux centres de congrès. L'idée de cette conférence est née de ce travail collectif. Je vous remercie aujourd'hui d'être présents alors, je comptais dire en grand nombre, mais effectivement, c'est quand même en grand nombre, puisqu'on a plus de 300 inscrits à ce colloque. On aura 300 étudiants qui vont nous rejoindre sur ces 3 jours. Et surtout, un colloque très international, puisqu'on a plus de 15 pays qui sont représentés sur cette première édition. Donc moi, je voulais simplement dire merci. Merci à la confiance et au soutien de Nantes Métropole pour réaliser cet événement qui est coproduit avec l'Université de Nantes et entre l'Université et la Cité des Congrès. Et je voulais plus particulièrement remercier Frédéric Benamou, ici présent devant, et puis Milad Doueli, qui ont été à l'origine de ce projet et qui ont donc pris ce rôle de président des programmes. Merci plus particulièrement aussi à Stéphane Roche de l'Université Laval et à Francky Trichet qui ont été co-organisateurs de l'événement au niveau scientifique. Et je voulais simplement souligner et remercier tout particulièrement l'Université Laval et notamment et surtout Thierry Béléguic qui porte depuis notre première rencontre en 2009 la volonté de développer entre nos deux territoires des initiatives partagées et pérennes. Donc, merci à tous et bon colloque.
J'appelle maintenant Olivier Labou, donc président de l'Université de Nantes.
Mesdames et messieurs, nous avons convenu que 3 minutes, c'était très bref et qu'il était difficile pour chacun d'entre nous de répéter « Monsieur le délégué général du Québec à Paris »,« Madame la vice-présidente de Nantes Métropole »,« Madame première adjointe au maire de Ville de Québec »,« Monsieur le directeur de la Cité des Congrès de Nantes ». Comme ça, c'est fait, vous n'aurez pas à le faire. Nous sommes bien conscients que les congressistes ne viennent pas pour nous écouter. Nous en avons la preuve. Et plus vite on aura fini, plus vite ils rentreront dans la salle, je les entends derrière la porte là-haut. Je voulais simplement insister sur plusieurs points, sur le fait que cette conférence internationale est un aboutissement et un début. L'aboutissement, parce que c'est un travail de longue haleine. J'avais noté que c'était 2011. Je vois Thierry Béléguic qui me dit 2010 et j'entends 2009. Donc c'est un travail, et vous pourrez dire 2008 tout à l'heure, c'est un travail de très longue haleine. Toujours est-il que la Convention a été signée en 2012, il y a 2 ans. Donc on voit bien le travail pour apprendre à se connaître et construire ce type d'événement cette année à Nantes et l'année prochaine à Québec, donc 2015. Ce temps est nécessaire parce qu'il faut apprendre à se connaître en profondeur sur les projets, mais se connaître en tant que personne, en tant qu'établissement. Comme ça a été dit, mais je pense qu'on va se répéter aussi, un travail entre des deux bords de l'Atlantique, entre les deux universités, et vraiment un contact qui se fait d'une manière vraiment très subtile, très profonde, je m'en réjouis, entre les deux centres de congrès, les deux écosystèmes, on a parlé des CCI, les deux territoires, Et donc, cette construction aboutit aujourd'hui à ce bel événement. Je voudrais insister juste sur un point, si vous permettez, c'est ce que je voudrais être la signature de l'Université de Nantes pour être sur le podium à 10 ans au niveau hexagonal sur le domaine de l'interdisciplinarité, mais là, nous allons au-delà sur la transdisciplinarité en créant des objets scientifiques, une nouvelle science, des éléments qui sont nouveaux. Et compte tenu des enjeux d'aujourd'hui, des enjeux de demain qui se présentent à l'humanité, ce sera notre réponse pour répondre à ces grands questionnements par la transdisciplinarité. Donc je voulais remercier particulièrement, vous en conviendrez, les troupes, mes troupes, Frédéric Benamou, bien sûr, vice-président recherche-innovation, Francky Tréchet, vice-président numérique, et puis particulièrement Thierry Bélégui, qui est le fil conducteur aussi depuis le début. Je ne serai pas plus long. Merci d'être venu. Je vous souhaite un congrès intéressant, mais au-delà, passionnant, parce que le sujet, je peux en témoigner, j'ai envoyé une invitation à l'ensemble des membres de la conférence des présidents d'université. Beaucoup m'ont répondu, beaucoup m'ont dit que c'était un sujet extraordinaire. Ce que j'ai entendu, c'est enfin, on peut parler de ces sujets-là d'une manière croisée. Je peux témoigner de cet intérêt. Merci de m'avoir prêté attention.
Je vais laisser la parole maintenant aux collectivités locales qui ont beaucoup soutenu cet événement, et en particulier donc à Karine Daniel, donc adjointe au maire de Nantes et vice-président en charge de la recherche et de l'enseignement supérieur.
Merci Clotilde. Eh bien, bonjour à tous. C'est un grand plaisir pour moi d'être avec vous ce matin et de marquer effectivement le soutien de Madame le maire de Nantes, Johanna Roland, et présidente de Nantes Métropole, à cette initiative. Alors cette initiative, elle est exemplaire à plusieurs égards. Tout d'abord, elle est le fruit d'une coopération étroite que nous avons engagée, alors depuis plus longtemps encore, et c'est peut-être pour ça qu'il y a une petite incertitude sur la date, avec la ville de Québec. Et on me demande souvent de parler des relations internationales, c'est un sujet qui est dans ma délégation et sur lequel on œuvre beaucoup, et surtout de leur traduction concrète pour le territoire. Là, on a, à travers cet exemple, eh bien, une illustration de ce que peut apporter pour le territoire en termes de rencontres, d'enrichissement, de création, d'innovation, l'investissement que l'on met sur les relations internationales. Et je souhaite donc tout particulièrement remercier les équipes de Québec et Madame Julie Lemieux qui met beaucoup d'énergie à développer cette coopération avec nous, et remerciez-en aussi votre maire. Alors, cette Digital Intelligence, elle intervient dans la semaine dédiée au numérique et au digital ici à Nantes. L'ambition, c'est bien à la fois de croiser des aspects scientifiques et puis de croiser des publics dans divers quartiers, sur divers événements, à travers diverses entrées. Et là, je suis ravie qu'un colloque scientifique puisse se tenir dans ces conditions et dans une telle semaine qui permet aussi des accès différenciés. On travaille au projet de Nantes Tech dans le cadre de la French Tech. Cette semaine est un élément important de notre visibilité dans cette démarche. Mais plus globalement, on s'inscrit dans une démarche de Smart Cities. Et là, on voit qu'on doit lier, et c'est tout là l'enjeu passionnant, à la fois des aspects techniques, à la fois des aspects de politique publique, mais aussi des aspects d'engagement citoyen. Et là, on a besoin de traiter les choses avec l'interdisciplinarité ou la transdisciplinarité, comme vous l'avez dit, Monsieur le Président, tout à l'heure. Et on est bien au cœur de nos sujets, au cœur de nos enjeux, pour le développement d'une ville que l'on souhaite dynamique au plan économique. L'enjeu de l'emploi est évidemment notre première priorité, mais aussi une ville, comme on dit au plan européen, inclusive, c'est-à-dire où tous les citoyens puissent prendre leur part dans ce développement. Et je pense que le numérique est au cœur de ces enjeux. En tous les cas, nous, on souhaite continuer à y travailler fortement. Merci.
J'invite maintenant Julie Lemieux, qui nous fait l'honneur de sa présence à Nantes aujourd'hui, donc première adjointe au maire de Québec.
Merci beaucoup. Un honneur pour moi d'être avec vous aujourd'hui ici à Nantes pour l'inauguration de ce colloque. C'est une excellente idée d'avoir marié la culture avec scopitone et non scopitone. En québécois, on aurait dit scopitone. Donc, c'est une excellente idée d'avoir marié la culture comme ça à la recherche et à la science pour parler du numérique. Vous savez, je pense que Québec et Nantes, ça a été l'objet d'un gros coup de foudre il y a quelques années, un coup de foudre qui dure, hein? C'est quand même rare dans la vie, mais ça existe, parce qu'on l'alimente énormément, cette amitié. Je pense qu'on a la même passion à Québec et à Nantes pour l'avant-garde, on a une volonté de dépassement également, un désir de se projeter dans l'avenir, mais en gardant aussi les pieds dans le présent. Et ça a forgé d'heureuses associations entre les universités, entre les centres des congrès, entre les villes. On a beaucoup de projets ensemble sur la table et on en est très heureux. On a conscience aussi, je crois, autant à Nantes qu'à Québec, que le numérique doit servir avant tout aux citoyens. L'objectif, c'est d'embellir leur vie, c'est de faciliter leur vie avec le numérique. Et je pense que c'est notre objectif commun, c'est vers ça qu'on veut se diriger et on va y arriver, c'est certain. Je suis vraiment impressionnée, en fait, par votre audace, votre créativité. Le coup de foudre, je l'ai eu moi-même en premier, en fait, pour Nantes, avec le maire de Québec, il y a ça peut-être 2-3 ans. On est venus ici un après l'autre. Il m'a même appelé à 2 heures du matin pour me dire « Il faut absolument que tu viennes à Nantes, c'est fou ce qui se passe ici, c'est extraordinaire ». Alors que je suis venue à votre rencontre, j'ai découvert des gens fantastiques. Francky me disait, adjoint à la ville de Nantes, Francky me disait qu'il avait inventé un serveur qui permettait de savoir si on aimait vraiment les choses ou pas, là, en étant connecté sur le cerveau. Alors moi, je suis convaincue que s'il me présentait des Nantais, mon cerveau dirait absolument, automatiquement, que je les adore. Donc, je peux vous dire ça aujourd'hui. Merci beaucoup pour votre accueil. Vous êtes des gens fantastiques. Je vous souhaite à tous une excellente conférence, un excellent colloque, et on va se voir l'année prochaine à Québec. Merci beaucoup.
Je laisse maintenant la parole à Michel Robitaille, délégué du Québec à Paris.
Merci beaucoup, bonjour. Également très heureux d'être avec vous. Je suis un Nantais de cœur. Je ne compte plus le nombre de fois que je suis venu à Nantes représenter le gouvernement du Québec, tant les relations avec la ville de Nantes sont riches et diversifiées. Il semble y avoir un peu de confusion sur la date à laquelle a commencé cette relation. Certains ont dit 2012, 2011, 2010. Moi, je vais vous le dire, 1960. C'est bien ça, c'est parce que nous travaillons, Français et Québécois, depuis plus de 50 ans, à établir une relation qui, au tout début, a été basée sur l'éducation et la culture. Et ça demeure, depuis ce temps-là, le moteur de cette relation franco-québécoise qui, bien sûr, touche également les secteurs de l'économie et des affaires sociales. Et je suis très heureux que cette relation franco-québécoise et nantaise et Québec-Ville passe maintenant par des pays tiers. Je m'explique, c'est que la coopération franco-québécoise atteint une maturité telle que maintenant, et on a l'exemple flagrant aujourd'hui, cette coopération-là inclut dans le cadre de colloques comme les vôtres ou d'interventions d'autres pays. Donc, cette fraternité franco-québécoise qui était basée au début sur, bien sûr, une langue en commun, sur une histoire que nous partageons, va beaucoup plus loin et je m'en réjouis. Et nous avons compris que le numérique est la voie de l'avenir. Et c'est pour ça que, dans le cadre de la coopération institutionnelle entre le Québec et la France, le numérique prendra une place importante dans les domaines de la culture, de l'innovation pédagogique, de la santé, des services sociaux et en matière de francophonie, notamment dans le cadre du 65e appel de projet de la Commission permanente franco-québécoise qui se clôture dans les jours à venir. Ainsi, la délégation générale du Québec à Paris sera encore plus à l'écoute des projets de coopération en matière numérique et c'est pour ça que cette conférence est très importante pour nous. Donc, je ne peux que souhaiter à toutes et à tous d'être créatifs et que ces quelques jours d'échange soient un tremplin pour la réalisation et la coopération future des plus innovantes. Merci beaucoup.
Merci à tous les 5. Je vous invite à rejoindre la salle. Je vais maintenant, on va vraiment rentrer dans le dur de ce colloque scientifique. Et donc pour ça, je vais appeler les présidents du comité de programme. Donc Frédéric Benamou, vice-président à l'université en charge de la recherche et de l'innovation, et Milad Doueli de la chaire d'humanisme numérique à la Sorbonne. qui vont donc introduire ce colloque.
Merci Clotilde. Donc, beaucoup de choses ont été dites, je pense que je vais en répéter un certain nombre, mais comme on est rentré dans le cadre d'une conférence internationale, je vais les répéter en anglais, donc ça changera un petit peu. Donc j'ai un prompteur qui me force à faire pendant 3 minutes et pas plus. Dear colleagues, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, as one of the program chairs, together with Milad Douei, who is going to talk to you right after me, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome you to DI 2014, the first edition of the International Conference Digital Intelligence. This conference is about meetings. It is about sharings. It is about connections. It is about junctions. It is about transdisciplinarity. It is about the digital transitions, the digital revolutions. It is about the digital age. Everything started, that was said, with the meeting of 2 universities, the University of Nantes and the University of Laval, and with the meeting of 2 cities, la ville de Nantes et la ville de Québec. It was also at that time with Francky Trichet, the conference chair, and I met with Milad. We then quite rapidly decided, and there was the second move in this game, to create a transdisciplinary and international conference on digital science, technologies, and cultures. The third step was to co-produce the event with Copytone, one of the few major digital arts and electronic music festivals in Europe, and later on, Frankie extended the whole thing and created on top of the DI's Copytone coalition, the Nantes Digital Week. That achieved the building of the DI quadrangle, made of science, technology, arts, and humanities. DI 2014 was conceived as a forum for researchers, artists, and IT industry and business players to exchange, share, design, and create together a new field of augmented science where transdisciplinarity, creativity, strong connections with society, and fast pipelines between research and the market are inseparable parts of the same material. Finally, we were very, very lucky. Extremely famous scientists around the world agreed to help us and participate in the adventure, giving the 6 wonderful keynote talks we are going to attend to in this conference, acting as area chairs and participating in the program committee. The rest of the story is ahead of us in the next 3 days, in the next years, and who knows, hopefully in the next decades. I will finish with a special thanks to Clotilde from the Nantes Saint-Nazaire International Agency, who introduced the speeches, and will continue with the keynotes. Of course, I need and want to thank many people and organizations without whom DI would not exist. I will do this tomorrow, I think, during the gala dinner, because I only have 3 minutes. And also, this is just very technical, don't forget to use the Twitter hashtag DI2014 and to download the smartphone application if you're registered. That will give you the program, participant, real-time program changes, my mobile phone number if needed, and many other things. Thank you all for being here. I wish you a great time in Nantes. Enjoy the conference, enjoy Scopitone, enjoy the city, and enjoy the Nantes Digital Week. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I don't think I will repeat, because otherwise you will be bored with us this morning, what Frédéric has just said and our prestigious speakers before. I would like to simply say a couple of words about the work we did and why we chose intelligence, digital intelligence, as the main topic, because it seems to me there are 2 basic issues that brought us together. First, the need to develop something that is interdisciplinary between sciences, humanities, arts, and so on and so forth, but also to go back to the founding of the digital itself. I would like to remind, but I think some of our colleagues know that much better than I do, that in computing machinery and intelligence, Turing identifies the machines that he was proposing to construct as both children and intelligent, because they know how to learn and they learn how to collaborate. And if anything, this experience, it was simply a story of collaboration, which is absolutely essential to digital culture between 2 universities, 2 cities, and colleagues who became friends. events. And I would like simply to conclude to thank you all for being here, for making this a remarkable week for Nantes and next year for Quebec, but especially I would like to single out the whole equipe of the University of Nantes, Frédéric, Francky, and the rest of them. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we're going to start the first key session with the first speaker, Nicole Dewandre. Nicole Dewandre has been working for more than 30 years at the European Commission. She studied applied physics engineering, economics, and philosophy in Belgium, but also in the United States at Berkeley. She started at the European Commission working in science and society issues. She then was in charge of the Sustainable Development Unit, and she's currently working at the DG Connect in charge of societal interface in the digital agenda of Europe. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you very much. Those behind the door can come in. I'm joking. No, but thank you very much for being here. And I think I want to reassure the organizer. I know the stress that it is to organize such an event, and I think it's important that when we are there, we are happy to be there, notwithstanding who is or is not there. So those who are there are right, and the other one have other reasons not to be here, I guess. And also I want to say that indeed I have been asked to speak English. You will hear a strong French accent. We are in Nantes, but that's the game of the conference, I think. And I also want to thank the organizer to have invited the European Commission through I will not speak on behalf of the European Commission, but to have introduced this European dimension in the dialogue between Nantes and Laval. And I want also to say before I start, but can I see how does, oh yeah, I have to do it myself, yeah. There. This is a Mac, I'm more used to PC, does it work? Okay, thank you. To say that transdisciplinarity is really at the core of the EU funding for research and innovation. With Horizon 2020, we want to first improve the seamlessness between research and innovation, and also to increase the linkages between the different disciplines. Ah, there we are. Good. Okay. Yes, ici, hein? Vous l'avez? Ah oui, OK. Là. Voilà. Yes, OK. So, yes, so the outline of my presentation will be as follows. It will have four sections. One is how we speak. Yes, and also I remember the quadrangle that Frédéric has introduced for this conference: science, technology, art, and humanities. I was wondering, where is policy? I will speak from the point of view of someone who has lived a long time, as you heard, in a policy-making circle. And my material for sharing with you this thought that I have now is really on this experience and a reflection on the experience and what I feel, which is implicit and underlying the discourse in policy-making circles, on the one hand, and on the second hand, indeed, I mobilize the thinking of Hannah Arendt, which has been a great inspirer to me. So I will draw your attention on how I feel about the way we speak about change in policy-making circle. Then I will invite you to really, what can we do in policy, and policy meaning policy makers, but also us as citizens. How do we step in hyperconnectivity with confidence? That requires, I think, a new way to think about what it is to be human, a post-humanistic way to think about what it is to be human, and show how this, what could seem theoretical considerations, have very concrete consequences, and, for example, on the notion of privacy. So the way we speak about change is first dominated, I think, often by speed. the pace of change is increasing, acceleration, all this is always put forward. I think we need to think twice and resist about this vision, because what can you do when you see that something is going fast? You can only try to run, and to run even faster and faster. But that's not necessarily conducive to thinking and making decisions. You don't really make decisions while you run, and in the end, this is how you end up. So I think that we insist on speed. In fact, we disempower ourselves to really think, what is it that we have to do? And what are the choices in front of us? So we have to be careful by mobilizing speed as an argument. The second thing we are using is lagging behind. And there, so technology goes forward and society is lagging behind, but who likes to be lagged behind? And this is, well, the good scenario where you can stay on your feet and be dragged, but you also have that one in the end. So I think that this lagging behind metaphor also is not very empowering for thinking what happens to us. So I prefer this notion of rethinking. Also, of course, this statute is really immobile, totally, so it's a bit extreme compared to the high-speed train, but it's to make the point, and you will, I hope, forgive me for that exaggeration. And I think it's important in the rethinking of the concept underlying the policy making, very important, because this is what allows to overcome polarization. I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel that often the debate is a sort of ping-pong game between two extreme positions that reassure each other that they are who they are just because they disagree with those in front of them. But often, none of these positions really grasp what is meaningful and lies between these two positions. So overcoming polarization is important. And this often can be done by what we can call an orthogonal turn, but an orthogonal turn done by social science and humanities. And this is where I plea for social science and humanities to have a rich role and be considered much more than only airbag for technological development or watchdogs for engineers who would need to know what can be done and what cannot be done. So it's much more than that. It's going to the shaping and redescription. I think that it's important to recognize that in SSH, social science humanities, paradigmatic shift is about shaping and redescription, allowing ourselves to see differently the reality we are living through. So this is the role that I think SSH has to take in the disciplinary mix that is studying the digital transition. And this requires to go beyond construction and deconstruction and constructivism. I think, I don't know if you will agree, but my assessment for the use policymaker can do out of SSH is that often, and this is also true in science and technology studies, I think, but if I'm wrong, I'm happy to hear it from you, and I'm still till the end of the conference to really engage and in dialogues, that often the point is to show that the vision of the engineer sometimes, which is a bit based on determinism, showing that there is no determinism, that things are socially shaped. And then the conclusion is, oh, if it is socially shaped, then there is a sort of undo-redo possibility, as if we had this possibility to undo-redo. So with the recognition of a social shaping goes the truth, so to speak, that we could undo and redo, or that we could do perfectly. So this is what I call then I think it's important to decouple the recognition of social shaping from the belief that because it is socially shaped, we are omnipotent about that. So, what is happening to us? Because I don't like to speak in terms of speed, I think it's much more important to speak in terms of the radicality of the change. My belief is that we are living at a moment where we are witnessing really a radical shift. And what is it? So, of course, we had a long time ago only the offline world. We all realize that. Then there is an online layer that went onto this offline world. And the policy framework has adapted. So we have adopted an e-commerce directive on top of to complete the commerce legislation. We have adopted an e-privacy directive. We are now reframing the privacy regulation. We have a draft privacy regulation in the pipeline to adapt to the E. So it has been a sort of add-on attitude for policy frameworks. The difficulty of what I think what is happening today is precisely that the two layers fall into each other, and that you cannot distinguish anymore when you are in online or when you are in the offline world. This mainly due to the convergence of, I think, the Internet of Things, what is coming, and also the mobile access, the broadband mobile access to Internet. So this really, as ubiquitous computing, as put by Mark Weiser in 91, can be seen today as a proxy. We know where we are going. We're not lagging behind, waiting for it to be there, really. I think we are at the moment where thinking that it is there is a good proxy for embracing where we are going. So this is, as I said, this is what I suggest to call the on-life world. So on-life meaning the merge between offline and online, or the blurring of the distinction. And this word can also be, this is also what I mean when I use the word hyperconnectivity. So it is not a time-lag issue, not neither, but is driven by vision, yes. And this is characterized, you may think, in some sense by sticky interaction. Potentially, all our interaction will be registered and searchable. So it is as if we left behind the Roman motto, verba volant, scripta manent. It's now we have to really see how we will design the way to behave, the way to be accountable to each other, but also the way to be free and to feel the need, the intimacy we need to feel. All this in an environment where we have sticky interaction, a sort of hypergravity in the social sense of the term, and also when we have a reactive and talkative environment. So these two new things. So you can, with the On Life initiative that I have been running in 2011, 2012, we started from the assumption that all the change can be, of course, this is one proposal among others that can be done, but can be grasped by realizing that there are four basic changes that really take the carpet out of the feet of the policy-making frameworks. The first is the blurring between reality and virtuality. No need to explain that, but maybe tell you why it's really important for policy. It's great, this blurring of the distinction between reality and virtuality is destabilizing, because we used to put on the distinction between reality and virtuality used to be put what? Where we have to behave and comply to rules and be accountable on the one hand, in the real world, so to speak, and where we are free in terms of phantasm and the deepest intimacy in the virtual. So when the frontier is blurred and we don't know what is the remit of this absolute freedom and where is the remit of where we have to behave, we are on a slippery ground. The second is the blurring of human, artifact, and nature. And this matters for policy because, again, on the distinction between human and artifact, we used to put the distinction between ethics and politics. Ethics was an issue of red line, things not to be crossed. You shall not do human cloning. Politics is more about choice. So shaping things, what is the choice between different acceptable options? But now the blurring between ethics and politics is also there. And the distinction between artifact and nature was important because this is where we put responsibility on the side of effect of artifact and sort of having to cope with what happened when it is about nature. We will treat differently the damage out of a tsunami, except when it's on a nuclear plant, of course, but the purely natural consequence of a tsunami is one thing, and the consequence of an atomic bomb is something else, even if in the end the same amazing damages occur. So that's very important also for policy and politics to know where is our responsibility. The third and fourth shift are reversal, so it's more flip over. That information is now overabundant and not scarce anymore. We come from a moment where it was this omniscient, omnipotent utopia, where we sort of think that the more we will know, the better we will act. A sort of, if only I know, then I will be able to do perfectly. Maybe it's a problem of research policy rhetoric, but we often hear that problems are due to lack of knowledge. It may be only a way to ask for more money, I don't know, if it's only that, or if it's really deeply anchored in our mind that if we knew more, we would be able to act better. So this linking between knowledge and doing well is okay when you have a scarcity of information and when you aim at having more information and knowledge. And when we are now, and we know information is and data is overabundant, so that we switch, we had natural resources, renewable resources, not only renewable, it's here exponential. And that means that information now is in the background and not anymore in the foreground. So we have to learn to live in an environment where information is in the environment, is in the background. And this has been anticipated by philosophers. They have sort of deconstructed the objectivity standpoint since a long time, but still in policy-making circle and as citizen for the expectation we have towards policy, we keep this sort of naive posture of the possibility of an objective standpoint, so to speak. So let's learn to really navigate and be immersed in data and information. And the last one is between entities and interaction. It's interesting to see here how we have insisted on the importance of linking between Laval and Nantes, or between both sides of the Atlantic, or between disciplines. So we have to pay much more attention to interaction more than to entities and identity. And this is also important for the EU, because let's see the EU not as the one entity that can fight to other or compete with other entities, but let's also look at the EU as the place where the member states interact with each other. So this is a place where the 28 member states learn and do interact with each other. And so instead of only mobilizing fragmentation, when we say fragmentation, we mean that it's better to be one than to be many. But to be many is nice if interactions are well curated and are creative. So it's a sort of plea for the plurality, and hyperconnected era calls for that. So in a nutshell, it is a little bit like if we come from the moment where we used to say the sky is the limit. Last century, we had to learn that the earth is the limit, and maybe we are at the moment where we have now to get acquainted to the fact that the self is the limit, and that we really feel that we have a finite span of attention, of years and time on this earth, and everything that we can capture and do will be constrained by that. And when I say the self is the limit, I mean that, of course, a limit is also what you like to transgress, so it's both what is limiting and what you want to challenge. With that, my main I suggest to say that modernity is really behind, and also in socials, in science in general, in arts, we speak of postmodernity. As long as we speak of postmodernity, we're still anchored mentally in modernity. So my point is that because we are exactly at the moment where ubiquitous computing becomes a good proxy for seeing where we are going, maybe, and this is what I suggest, hyperconnectivity is a name that we can give to postmodernity. And with that, objectivity is to modernity what reflexivity is to hyperconnectivity. And this is how I link the importance that we have to pay to how we interact. So that the shift from modernity to hyperconnectivity is really a shift about how we look at interactions, and paying much more attention to interaction. And always keep this consciousness of the self on board, because you have the self is the limit. So on that, now this post-humanistic approach of what it is to be human, I suggest can be in computer and ethics conference. You hear people wondering when robots will become human. And it appears to me that the question is flawed, because in fact this question makes only sense because we have, I'm mixing here, yes. Because this question makes only sense because we have thought about human as if they were machine since 2, 3 centuries. So it is only because we have brainwashed ourselves with this approach to human in terms of machine that the question of when we will make robot human makes sense, not the other way around. Now, how can we, if we look at how we can define what it is to be human in this period of time, I think that if it is about the percentage of flesh and bone, for example, compared to material, it will not go. We cannot decide that from in this line, you know, where we have 100% artifact on the left and a pair of glasses on the right, where will we draw the line of where you become human and where you are not yet one? I don't think that defining being human by rationality, as has been done, of course, by philosophers, also is a way to go, if rationality is understood as algorithm and IQ type of characteristics. Is it about language? Of course, we see that a lot of artifacts now speak, and this is not about it. About the Turing test, you mentioned Turing. My problem with the Turing test, I guess you're acquainted with it, it is that a robot would be, a machine would be considered as human if behind a screen another human would consider that the chat that was built by, replied by this machine, that the human behind a screen would be fooled and consider that this was a human chatting and not a machine. So this is, but I think that it is quite problematic to base the definition of human on fooling ourselves as human. So for me, all this is more or less, I have to say, a no-go. I found a great way to redefine what it is to human in The Human Condition of Hannah Arendt. And very shortly, because I have no time to go deeper into this, in this human condition, in fact, she distinguished, she has the passion of distinction, the passion of difference. So this is already, to pay attention to interaction, we have to embrace difference. That has also to mean that we have to be careful when you use silo. For example, the expression silo is used when we are afraid of difference, when we think that making a difference is necessarily leading to having watertight frontiers. And then, but so having the passion of difference is also recognizing that you navigate across them, and then there is a porosity between the different things you distinct. But we cannot do without distinction. We have to distinct things to think only, and also to organize the world and our lives and everything. So she distinguished 3 types of activity: labor, work, and action. With labor, she defines, for her, labor is all the activity which we do because just we are a living being. We are organic living being. That means we need to eat, we need to clean, we need to reproduce ourselves. All this activity, we need to feed a baby who is screaming. So what we do by necessity just to stay alive, this process aspect of our activity is what she called labor. That's all around necessity. Work is the activity that we do when we know where we are going. So I plan to have a house, I make a plan, then I build it. The same with an object, a tool, anything. So work is the activity that where you have a vision of where you want to go, and then you go there. So it's a means to an end logic. It's a different type of activity. And this is the realm of instrumentality, I would say, the work. And the third is action, and this is where for her is liberty. This is what happened between men, she says, but we will include women, between men who are freed from their necessity, so they are beyond their level of society. They have eaten, okay, so they have no urgent need to stay alive. They are beyond that level, and they engage with each other without instruments. So they are not in the work remit, but because they speak to each other, they act together without instrument and without these intermediaries. So this is a remit of freedom. And for her, we have to recognize the 3 forms of activity: labor, work, and action. My sense is that in the policy-making circle and in modernity, in fact, we have totally forgotten the third thing, which is action, because for her, action is also what is unpredictable. We are explaining everything in terms of labor and work. Labor is what we have to do, and often you see policymakers explain things in terms of there is no other way. We know that here for the moment here. And in all member states and at EU level. In fact, policymakers often mobilize the fact that the thing they do is the only thing that can be done to justify the decision. So, and indeed there are constraints, I'm not saying otherwise, but so labor, the process dimension is put forward. Work, this is what we also is recognized, the means to an end logic. But the action, what comes out of an interaction between free persons that recognize their plurality, this is not recognized. So because of that, we condemn ourselves to, in fact, we live in a flat world. Instead of having a 3D perspective to think what happens to us, we bound ourselves in the flat plane made of work and labor. I will suggest to rethink the distinction between artifact, nature, and agents, or humans, by remembering that there is action. And how can that be done? In fact, that I transform what Arendt recognized as different type of activity by different forms of otherness. And there I come to the fact, you remember interaction. Interaction is with ourselves as one end of an interaction towards others. And there are different forms of otherness. One form of otherness, the one we know best, is when the other is an artifact, an object. The other is manipulated. This is when the self perceives him or herself as manipulative. And Mary Midgley, a British moral philosopher, says that birds fly because the two anterior members are wings, and men and women are manipulative beings because the two anterior members are our hands. So we love to manipulate, and it's not something negative, but it's just that as birds are flying beings, we are manipulative beings. This shows the attraction we have for having the other considered as an object. That is something that reacts to expectation, that is predictable, that fulfill a function that I have control on. So this form of otherness I will call a vertical otherness. There is another otherness when the other is recognized as another self, and the self is plural. And again, plurality is a key concept in Arendt political thinking. Plurality is made of three characteristics. The fact that we are of the same kind. So same kind is not an objective equality. It's equality as a starting point. If we forget that we have someone in front of us when it is another human, if we forget to recognize that there is sameness between ourselves when there is also, of course, difference, then we don't enter into a human interaction. So this is the sameness that is at stake. The second is a uniqueness, the fact that when we are recognizing someone as a human, that is a recognition of that person as unique, not as reducible to their attributes. And the third thing, this is the magic of the concept, I think, is reflectivity, is recognizing that we only access to our identity because we appear among peers. It's not, our identity is not an object to us. It is something that, of course, we have a key to it. We control it partly. But we appear to others, for whom we are, in a way we don't totally control. And this is, she says that identity is like has diamond character. It's located in our neck. And in fact, it appears to others more surely than to ourselves. So that if I want to control my identity, what I will show is that I am narcissistic. I want to control. So you will perceive that I want to control, but in the end, I will not control because this perception of being narcissistic will escape me. So there is always something that escapes to each other, and this is not a weakness. The point here is to recognize that this is what makes us human, this bundling of the three things, the fact that we are human because we are in need of each other, to know who we are and to access our own identity. So if we had eyes behind our head, we wouldn't be more perfect or more human. We just would not be human anymore. And this is horizontal otherness. So this is when we engage and we are conscious of the fact that we always are sitting, we are spending our life behind our face. So that the distinction between agents and artifacts is not about the nature. I know I cannot escape this word, also I recognize the problematic meaning of it, but it's not about between object, man-made versus human, women-made so far, or the notion of the level of autonomy that some are under control and some are out of control. I think rather, so it cannot be approached as a sorting exercise where the sorter is split from the sortee, but rather it's about the type of otherness at play. And so agents are, we recognize agents where it is other selves, and artifacts is when it is object. So I speed up because I have a quarter, I'm at the half hour and I have 15 more minutes to go, but I think I will be in time, I will. So the two forms of otherness, horizontal and vertical, you recognize, but I think we have to introduce a third one. Remember labor, work, action, there were three dimensions, and the need to introduce a third form of otherness is to recognize when the other is neither an object under control, nor a self, another self. This is when the other is the world in which we come when we are born, and that we live when we die, or it's in general the environment that we move within, and that is neither under control nor threatening, because it is what we are within. And in that, when we have this type of otherness relationship, this is where we seek orientation. We wonder where we are. Orientation. So control and orientation is not the same thing. So the code of the three types of otherness, the first one, the fluid of the relationship, is when you pay attention to someone else in the sense that you grant that other self their identity, and you grant also that other self the power to send you back who you are. The other as an object is when you wonder, what is it? And you seek control and predictability. And I'm more than happy that when engineers build a bridge, they consider myself as an object because I'm reduced by my attribute, the weight I have, how much my car will weigh when I go on the bridge. So there are circumstances where it is very good to be, as human, taken as an artifact because it allows us to be safe in some circumstances. But in other circumstances, it's wrong. So that's why we have to navigate between these different forms of otherness. So control, and the third one is exploration and orientation, and there the question that we ask ourselves is, where am I? So that stepping in hyperconnectivity is really about getting away from this mono-dimensional form of otherness. My claim is that for the moment, we understand everything and we try to interpret everything only in terms of vertical otherness. So that it's still anchored in the omniscience, omnipotence utopia, and everything is built on control. I want to control things, or I have to be, or if I am not in control, that means I am being controlled. So it's an either obedience or control, or fear to be controlled. So control is all over the place. If we keep this vertical otherness, but we add the two forms of otherness, which are horizontal and vertical otherness, I think we have a better apprehension of what happens to us. And this brings two additional notions, plurality and natality. The natality is really the notion of starting from where we are. Okay, yes, the world is changing, and each time it's a new baseline. So no regret for going back and undo, redo, but how do we go from where we are? So that's a sort of starting from where we are and recognizing that new beginnings is the way we are powerful is because we are beginners. She says we are not only aren't mortal being, yes, sure we are, but we are also born beings. So this sort of approach, recognizing that freedom is in beginnings is very important. And plurality is this bundling of equality, specificity, and reflectivity. If you see how we portray interaction in the policy world, I think that we have gone too far into classical mechanic metaphor. Interactions are all, we are considering ourselves, people, human, only as rational, interest-led beings. Often rationality is meant to be self-optimization. Empathy for others is not taking on board when we try to model people. We tend to think of freedom as autonomy, but that's crazy because we are relational. We don't know who we are if we don't appear in front of others. So it's very strange to think of freedom as autonomy because the opposition of autonomy is heteronomy. So the challenge is how to think about freedom and in the framework of our relationality. And incentive then, yes, incentive, the relationality is transformed into, then I can influence someone else. And it's all turned into how can I force or influence, induce what I want, again, in a control perspective. I think plurality trumps this current and popular metaphor for interaction and adds a richer way. We have to bring in empathy, and I want to draw the attention of the problem of the invisible hand and the praise of the optimization game. I'm not, of course, a believer that a big plan would do better than the decentralized interaction. So in that sense, indeed, invisible hand is a good reminder. The problem is when we are brainwashed to learn that we can only think for our own interest narrowly defined and everything will be good. This form of decoupling between our own interest narrowly defined and our feeling for the empathy for others is greatly problematic. In court, when you have someone who has no empathy for someone else, he is deemed to be psychotic and goes to psychiatric asylum, not even to prison. So why is it that in economic thinking, we consider a good proxy of behavior to think that people should be encouraged to behave only along their own interest? I move on because I need there to, the natality is important because it avoids hyper-responsibility. And it avoids this syndrome that I say that, we see that what happens to us is the fruit of our past interaction, and then that means we are responsible for it all. So there is now a need to find what is the exact scope or a more precise and modest scope of responsibility that we don't take on our shoulder the whole Anthropocene, but that we take responsibility for the difference we can really make. Now, privacy in the last part. So this is sort of concrete application of how shifting from modernity to hyperconnectivity is required to address the current issues. Privacy is still centered of the notion on home and now data. We often hear the principles of privacy, the two basic principles on which the framework is built is data control and data minimization. So we, human, are data subject, and we have the right to control the use of our personal data by others. And data controllers, as the data processors are called, people manipulating personal data, are requested to declare what is the purpose of handling the data, and then they have to stick to that declared purpose. And do it in the minimal way, the most efficient way. So that's data minimization principle. These are the two basic principles that were coined in the year 80s when informatics, when people realized, and this is when the CNIL was created, it was the beginning of the informatics age, but still with the mindset of the post-World War II and the post-totalitarian time. So, but that was put forward when data was still not this sort of signature or trace or byproduct, the fact that we have a digital shadow and it's all over the place. So that concept of us being data subject is really when based on a framework where data is still sort of the foreground and the scarce resource more than the overabundant resource in terms of framing, I mean. So the protection of personal data is in the Charter of Fundamental Rights. But what I want to show now is that this framing is flawed, in fact. First, I want you to take note of the gender dimension. And that Geneviève Fraisse, a French philosopher that maybe you know, have drawn our attention on the fact that when Rousseau is asking for the decoupling of the public and the private, it was aiming at making men equal in the public space, but letting them remaining dominant in the home. so that remaining king in their own castle, and often at the expense, of course, of the women in the home, the women and the children. So that this decoupling is done in a men's perspective. The Geneviève Fraisse, the anthropologist working for Intel, has written a book with Paul Durisch called Mess and Mythology in Ubiquitous Computing, and there she says something that should be obvious to all of us, but came only when I read this book, and it says that women with a domestic violence statistic, we realize that for women, home are more dangerous than the street. We encounter violence, we have much more chance to encounter violence at home than in the public space. Of course, you also have the issue of the double day, that for women, homes are where you have a second working day when you come back. Also, there is progress, and it's not the same everywhere, but still it's a majority of the situation. And then also that for women, access to the public is a recent right. So with that, first, I say I don't blame men at all. It's normal when you think that you think from where you are, so that a man think as a man is only normal. But it is amazing for me to see how women embrace the men's framing of privacy without questioning it. And you see the women scholars working on the right for privacy really taking this on board without sort of having this awareness and this endorsement of the dominee posture as a matter of fact, as if it was the only way to read. And often I wonder if we women can scream, fight, resist, conform, but can we speak with our voice? And I'm here influenced by the recent reading of Carol Gilligan in a different voice. So to this assertive and affirmative standpoint to say what are our needs. And yes, I recognize, speaking with women, for example, the misogynistic things on internet, or when women take position, the fact that they receive a lot of sexist treatment or harassment, they choose to deal with that in there alone. They put it aside and continue. They say, okay, making a fuss about it will drown me even more. So they are left alone with this problem. And I was wondering if there a link to be made between this fact of the strategy of ignoring and letting this in the dark compared to the light in which we put the privacy issue as framed by men. So again, no blaming for men, only a call for women to come together and complete this notion of privacy to see what are our own needs. So it is important also to privacy in transition. When I say debug the privacy mix, I'm struck by the fact that when we speak of privacy, privacy is a sort of buzzword under which we put all what is the societal consequence of this hyperconnected era. And it is as if we were lacking words. I call on a sort of deploying a semantic field where we are more precise, and as society that we really deploy all the issues and challenge and go beyond using this sort of magic word or bullet, silver bullet of the word, putting privacy as a brand or as a flag. For the moment, you see that in the privacy mix, you have the freedom of expression issue, but how can we really speak of this issue in the same way when it is about people in Syria or in China and people in our country? Is it really the same thing? Or not? Do we need to hide issues of sex behind freedom of expression? We can understand that we don't want that the browsing of porn website goes public or things like that. So how do we address this issue about sex? And also the tolerance margin with rules. I think we hear about privacy. Technically, you could imagine that it's very possible that when we drive our car, we have a permanent monitoring, and you would have at the end of the month, your bill is just imagination. There is no rules in the making, don't worry, but in imagination you could say that after the end of the month you receive your bill of where you have been overspeed. Or where you have parked, so no way out with the different rules of being a driver in the public space. people will scream at privacy issue. I think it's more about, yeah, what about margin with the rules? Do we consider that in the public space we need not to be surveyed because we need this margin with rules? Or then do we need to make the rules more adapted to what we really can obey? So, and also when you see that privacy issues are brought about when we speak about soft drugs, there are two ways to look at it. Either we shouldn't, public space or the justice shouldn't know about that because we should be allowed to have our shadow activities. Or you can say that if it comes to be learned, what do we do with it? And we can also change our attitude as society about what we do with this. And I want to share with you, for example, in Belgium, I was quite proud of my country when the Prime Minister in charge was found to have sent SMS to a lover who was not his wife. And in fact, the whole political class and the media said, and so what? I mean, this is not. And so that it is the paper who have put this forward who was ridiculed instead of him. And so just showing that there are also always two jaws on how an issue is framed and not only one. So privacy in hyperconnectivity, I would say that it is indeed important to recognize that we all have as humans, and that's part of our sameness, we all have this dual need of intimacy and of being recognized by others. So for gaze, exposure, and shelter. This is a joint need. Of course, what we like to do in public and in intimacy is different for each of us, but each of us has this dual need. And I think that this is a basis. So how is privacy linked with intimacy? So that we also decouple the notion of privacy from the fact that there is a morale, good and bad, that what we want to do in private would necessarily be something bad, and what is good can be done in public. No, there are a lot of other things. And I think we need work from SSH to understand better what is it that we need to do intimately and where we need recognition. And this is also where the distinction between orientation and control is of high importance. When you are in an environment, you like to know where you are. You don't need necessarily to control your environment. It was in an introduction of a philosophy magazine that orientation and control was taken for the same word. In an editorial of a philosophy magazine, I was surprised. Oof, this is amazing, because for me, orientation and control are really two distinct issues. And in our policy world, we speak of control all the time, and we just overlook our need of orientation. And remember the third forms of otherness? This is where we need orientation and not control, necessarily. So this is important to distinguish these two things. So that instead of having always transparency and control put forward, I think it's important to recognize that transparency and control was a translation of ensuring ourselves respect and fairness in a modern era. In a hyper-connected era, we need to retranslate what is fairness, so that avoid fooling for me is key. And indeed, transparency and control was a way to translate avoid fooling. Avoid fooling is key because, remember, the relationality. Because we need others to know who we are and to know where we are. The sort of fair interaction is a key component of living the experience of being free in a relational mode. So that fairness, avoid fooling, is even more important now that liberty and freedom is not being left alone and in our own home behind our door. So being free as a relational self is also having this assurance of not being fooled knowingly, which doesn't mean being omniscient and omnipotent. And in the pre-digital world, we have developed a lot of things, both socially and legally, to avoid fooling. Now, with the digital, people have lost sometimes we are losing our benchmarks, and we need to recover this sense of orientation. Now, when we say we need to recover, we shouldn't hurry up. Remember the speed. It's not about rushing and doing wrong things. Let's be quiet. Let's recognize that it's something that we need to see how society evolves. I think policy there has to be listening to and responsive to the latent signification. And this sense of new orientation will come from both society, policymakers, in a sort of latency crystallization attitude. It will not be a sort of cause and effect that anybody would dictate or impose new visions and others will apply and be receptive to them. It's more to interact again. Policymakers interact with society. They don't parent society, they partner with society. And a key issue I see coming is all the issue of dynamic pricing. So one way of being lost when you do e-commerce is that you don't know the extent to which the price you offered for a good on internet is taking into account information that the provider has about you in terms of browsing or what type of data. And that fact will never be addressed by you being in control of your data. And also, I don't think that we all want to spend nights and weekends being data managers. Maybe some may be fond of that, but I don't think it should be a condition for being a good citizen to spend or spare time on being in control of our data. So it's very important that we have a sort of collective discussion about what is fair in terms of pricing. Is it fair that because I have bought an expensive dress or because the provider have access to the profile of my banking situation that I am offered a higher price when I buy something than someone with lower revenue? Is it a good way or not? I think this question will come because for the moment there is a possibility on internet. You have lost this ability to recognize if what you are offered is the same as what is offered to someone else, or if it's just targeted on you. And the last point is this privacy in the notion of attention. The real new thing, I think attention was below radar screen because we had this scarcity of information. So, and the fact that the encyclopedic ideal was there. Now that we are orphan of the encyclopedic ideal, attention is really the binding constraint of our experience. And for the moment, attention is paid attention to only in an economic way. It's in a microeconomic way, like I am paying with my own attention, the one I pay to the advertising on the web page I have access to freely. So we consider attention as this additional revenue that I have and for which I can receive a service on the web. But to this economic attention, which also doesn't take into account the fact that attention is a relational thing, that it doesn't like to be fragmented, that at one point it's a suffering, there is this ecological approach. How can we avoid being polluted by too much unsolicited thing? So the ecological approach to attention, and also the political approach to attention. Channeling the attention of someone else is an issue of power. Power used to be exerted on space, then on time, now on attention. If we want to remain free in a hyperconnected era, we also have, it's our attentional space that needs to be protected because it's vulnerable. Fairness in time, in policy, often fairness is about money. But the fact that when you call a call center, that the menu always offer the last what is maybe in your interest and the first what is in the provider's interest, you spend time there. What do we do? How do we ensure that we have fairness in time? And also the choice that we are offered when we want to tick that we accept terms and conditions, we know that if it is a total go, no go, it's not a choice. So we will have to offer some reasonable choice for people to know that they really have a choice. But what will be, of course, this will be discrete. We cannot make a sort of infinite menu. So we will have to choose now what are the different menu. And icon will be a sort of a new or additional vocabulary. So all this is part of what I see the societal work, collective societal work. And for me, attention should be part of the human integrity. Much more than data or me as a data subject, which keeps me in a modern framing, I think that I would be in need that the human integrity that for the moment is bound to our body and to our home is also extended to the attentional space. And what I've been doing in front of you for privacy, we have also to do it for the notion of identity, of responsibility, of fairness, I alluded to it, power, democracy. So that's exactly the challenge that our societies have to go through for the moment, because we are at the moment where we have to embrace what's coming in front of us, i.e. hyperconnectivity. And that is at the core of our approach to SSH and responsible research innovation in DG Connect. So we really are calling on social scientists to engage in the technological project on a par basis with engineers and to work these questions together. And the SSH is really expected to be, yes, beyond the impact and really, as I said in the beginning, beyond the deconstruction, demonstrating that things are socially shaped. Yes, okay, but then what? So really be partner of policy making by proposing new ways to grasp concerns in this hyperconnected era. And this is the end. Join. We have the Florence, we have on October 9 and 10, a proposals day for all the project of Horizon 2020 with a deadline for the budget 15, so the second wave of call deadlines in now the first half of 15. This Proposals Day is soon coming in Florence, and there is a website. If you Google Proposals Day, or if you Yahoo or Bing Proposals Day, you will find it, but the link is also there. So thank you very much. Oh, yes, yes. Okay. I stay here? Yeah? Okay, okay.
Any questions, observations, reactions? No? I have some questions, but I would like to... Well, I will start, and maybe I think the audience will become more warmed up. Well, thank you very much for a superb talk. And obviously, we don't have time to go into details in some of the rather complex issues you raised. But first, on the policy making, as I was listening to you, I was struck by, especially between reformulating some of Arendt's major concepts. What about digital labor, and what the European Commission today is thinking about digital labor, and some of the work that's being developed relatively recently in Europe versus the versions we tend to have in the United States about the acceptance of forms of digital labor, whether negative, positive, whether imposed, forms of constraints that go back to some of the issues you raised, including data, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of one issue. And the second one, I was very struck that if we go back to Arendt, and in some ways you gave us, I think, quite a very elegant critique of rational choice as it has been developed. And I was struck, if you think about the dates, obviously, for Neumann's book was sort of founding moment of both, in part, digital culture, economy, and computing science, but also mathematical economy. And what we tend to have is obviously Arendt's are pretty much the same dates. You know, the 50s, and he died in 1952, I think. But anyway, but it's very interesting to see those things got developed around the same time, those articulations, and we encountered them again, obviously, today with kind of the relational hyperconnectivity.
Well, on the first one, I just want to say that I have colleagues working on digital skills, and I'm sure I'm quite short on the answer I can give to your, and because you asked what the Commission think about that, so we have, did I understand well when it is it what we do about skills to promote digital skills?
It's the fact that by contributing to social networks, we are indirectly and implicitly working, providing labor without being either paid, compensated or...
Okay, voilà. Yeah. Okay, I can pursue on sharing what I think about that, but it's not the whole Commission, and also because my standpoint, but that's my position as advisor, and I'm really accepted within the institution for being reflexive about what we are doing, but I realize that so yes, I am from within the Commission, but what I just said here is not the mainstream policy. We are still modern in the mainstream, and you see You see in our words, we use the word modernize. I jump each time I see modernize, I say my colleague, but for me, when I read modernize, it means I read archives. It's funny is that people continue to think that modernize is up to date, but okay. So on that digital labor perspective, it's, yes, it's a sort of, it plugs in what I said, the microeconomic approach to attention. I think that it's this hegemonic way to measure everything in terms of our interest and surplus is only part of the picture. And it is okay if it is one side of looking at things, but it is wrong if it is hegemonic. And I will go then to see all this, also this approach of the digital Turk, what is it? Yeah. So I think this is indeed nightmare. And we see that if we go only with this microeconomic approach, I mean, we will totally dissolve our lives. There is no room for representation of the notion of freedom. Or, yeah, so yes, it's one way to look at things. We can, in policy, I think, measure this, be attentive to it. But about my own concern, which is that we as humans from the policy-making circle and citizens in their expectation to policy, that we switch, we shift plane and we go from the modern to hyperconnected, it's not at the core of the hyperconnected view.
Any other questions? Oh, there's one question.
Courageous, thank you.
When you talk about hyperconnectivity and postmodernism, you made a link with reflexivity. But from my point of view, maybe I'm wrong because I don't have the necessary philosophical background on this. It's like quite the opposite, because if you are hyperconnected, you start seeing more the others and the connections you have with others. And from my point of view, you lose reflexivity.
Yes, I guess what I meant is that there it's more in a normative way, that the choice, if we want to stay anchored in a hyperconnected world, we have to do that from within. Because what I see, which is a sort of fear fascination, the freak out of superintelligence, either you see that the sort of transhuman perspective, this is why I insist on post-humanistic human, because often when we tend to consider artifacts that they will be in fact, they will fulfill the image that we had of the omniscient, omnipotent creator or of God. Some have this vision and put it forward. My point is that if we embrace this vision in politics, we will only stimulate, nurture fear, fascination, reaction, or as Jean-Gabriel Ganachia called it, the surveillance. If we only honor surveillance and consider that the only thing a human can do is avoidance of being surveyed, then we are in a lose-lose game, because you can only spend your time checking that you are not controlled. You see the nightmare. So that, what I really want to offer with Arendt, and that's for me, Françoise Collin said, in fact, she is a postmodern thinker of the politics, and I didn't see that until I read it in Françoise Collin. And her resistance to political philosophy, her point of saying, I am not a philosopher in political science, I'm a political thinker, is because, yes, the reflexivity for me is a choice we have to make. We have to decide to take some distance with the fear fascination of either being grasped and being imprisoned, or of being on top of things. We have to learn to be comfortable in this hyperconnected, sticky interaction, 5G, super social gravity type of thing, and say there, that's why I want to build freedom in a relational mode. So it's an invitation. That reflexivity is paying attention to that fact that when we forget the reflexivity, then we squeeze ourselves as human, and we sort of either get out, we get out of the human dimension.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Did I help or didn't understand? Yeah.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. And just a question, when you said control is not orientation, for you, what is the strongest? It's orientation or control?
Yeah, so then I think that managing difference, and this is why I use the metaphor of the basis of a vectorial space, is that I don't want to make a hierarchy between these things. I think it's important to recognize that we need each of them to be able to describe the experience we are having. So I really think that the point is when I seek control and when I seek orientation. And with this distinction, in fact, this is in reaction of what I hear from scholars sometimes, some saying that if something goes beyond control, then it should become another self. So that the machine, which is not doing exactly what she has been thought about to do, would become a new agent, you see. And for me, becoming a new agent would mean that I grant the machine the fact of sending back to me, appearing in front of the machine would be part of an experience which is giving me access to my identity. And that, but I think that a machine that escapes control, I would rather put it in the nature back again, so that the satellite who stops to respond becomes a star, not another self, you see. So there is two ways for treating artifacts who become beyond control. Either consider them as another self, and this I resist, or considering they're part of the nature.
I was thinking of your reflection when you said you were amazed because the philosopher journals were mixing control and orientation. I can understand the point of view because when we see history from Bisons to Third Reich in Germany, we can easily, on reading at Marx too, we can easily see that orientation is stronger on the to control human people and societies than strict control, in fact. That was my reflection.
Yes, I understand, but that's also where I think Arendt is important, that this choice of considering that control is the only thing that matters, and that if you don't accept to see it, that means you're not political or that you are fooling yourself, or I think is a sort of, it's wrong in the sense, yeah, I claim it's wrong, because what happened between humans is something is, again, Arendt, she says, you know, that the true history, contrary to fiction, has no author. And by believing that in order to make things that will happen good, you need to be in control, or that if you are not in control, that means others are in control, this sort of always postulating someone is in control is a sort of, for me, it's a relinquishing, how can you say that? It's a spillover of religion, in a sense.
You really think that, as said Milad first, when people contribute to social networks and it makes big data, and data analysts, data scientists made sell recommendation for marketing with that, so it can, we can say in a way a part of human society controls the other part of human society just by orientation, and the controlled part of human society agree with this control because it provides by itself the ways and the tools for orientations. You think really that it cannot be blurred with control and orientation?
No,
and
of
you
course,
think yourself?
You see, it's about sort of ironist posture. I know there is an essay. I know there is Mark Zuckerberg making advantage. I'm not on Facebook, but so I realize some are taking advantage of my data. I'm only saying that, thinking that all what happened with my data is sort of being accounted for by considering the benefit that others are doing in the fooling of myself. This is one part, but not all. It remains that there are things that happen that are beyond control. And again, to take a hand, and I think that we have to, the more you believe in the power of those in control, the more you give them power. So it's very paradoxical. So that's why we have to be ironist. And Arendt says, you know, that yes, the final solution existed, but it didn't exist everywhere, and we shouldn't ask anything more for this earth to remain habitable. So it's a part of modesty, and to think if someone is control freak, instead of being freaked out by that control freak, laugh about him. Say, it's not, he will not have it all, and never as much as he wants, anyway. So that attitude, I think, is a way to anchor our freedom also.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and Nicole, thank you for a wonderful talk to open the DI 2014. Thank you very much.